undercutting it through partisan politics. But we have no idea how Donald Trump would handle Iran, and frankly, neither does he. To try to figure out what his plan would be about Iran, conservative host you had asked him how he would deal with the Quds Force, which is the aggressive Iranian military units that actively undermine our interests in Iraq and Syria. Trump replied that the Kurds have been horribly mistreated. He talked about the Kurds because he had no idea what the Quds Force was, and that the Kurds and the Quds Force could not be more different. In the same interview, Trump couldn't tell the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas either, but don't worry, he said, eventually, quote, I will know more about it than you do, and believe me, it won't take long. I wonder how much comfort our Israeli ally would find in that promise, or in other ideas he's had, like Donald's desire to be a, quote, neutral guy when it comes to the peace process, as if you could be neutral about the desire for peace, or to make Israel pay for the defense aid that we provided. Israel is our strongest partner in the region, facing renewed wave of terror attacks, and in an area where both ISIS and Iran pose daily threats, and Trump's plan was to pat them on the back and tell them good luck. That's no way to treat an ally. That's no way to treat a friend. When it comes to ISIS, Hillary and I have a smart and credible plan. We'll intensify our strikes on their strongholds in Iraq and Syria. That is already shrinking the real estate that ISIS controls in the region. And Hillary and I both believe that Congress should finally do its job and take a vote on whether the American military should be using force for now over 2 years against ISIS. We will keep pursuing diplomacy to end the conflict so that it's fueling ISIS's expansion. We'll launch an intelligence surge and ensure that we're coordinating with our allies how to dismantle ISIS's global networks. And we'll harden our defenses here at home. Trump doesn't think our military is up to the task, or America is up to the task of stopping ISIS. He has literally said, quote, we can't beat them. He has more than once called our armed forces, quote, a disaster. He says that the armed forces of the United States are, quote, in shambles, that they're, quote, going to hell. I don't know how anybody who's met with our men and women in uniform could think that, much less say it. As a military father, Donald Trump's disrespect for our military absolutely infuriates me. And when I hear him say, I'll be, quote, the best with the vets, I have to wonder how a guy who stiffs veterans' charities and who brags openly about avoiding paying taxes, I have to wonder how that guy will ever be somebody you can count to stand up for vets. Trump says he knows more, quote, than the generals do. Knows more than the generals do. Though I bet most of the generals knew that ISIS is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In more than one interview, Donald wasn't up to speed on that important fact. A sad fact is groups like ISIS are actually kind of rooting for Trump. A recent article in Foreign Affairs actually interviewed a number of jihadists, and many of them are hoping for Trump to succeed in the campaign. They've even put out recruitment videos featuring him, since Donald Trump's talk of this un-American banning of all Muslims plays right into their hands for propaganda purposes. Now, Donald Trump has famously said that his plan to defeat ISIS is secret, but it's a secret he's glad to talk about frequently. He has said, for example, it's simple, just bomb the oil fields and take the oil. Bomb the oil fields and take the oil. Well, let's play that one out. If we bomb oil fields, it will create massive fires. Okay, so then we would have to do something to put out fires. That would involve sending in an awful lot of contractors and others to put out fires. And since there's a civil war going on, if we put in contractors and others to put out fires, we'd have to put in a lot of troops to protect them in putting out the fires. And that doesn't even take into account the pipelines and refineries that we'd have to either build or take over, or the other problems concerning every aspect of his plan after the first day, that just doesn't interest him. Now, at other times, Trump talks about disengaging and letting Syria become, quote, a free zone for ISIS. Sometimes he talks about dramatically increasing the use of American ground troops in Syria and Iraq. And sometimes he's even mused about using nuclear weapons against ISIS, which would cause massive civilian casualties. You know this. The power to authorize the use of nuclear weapons requires a profound understanding of our long-standing posture of deterrence. For decades, the nuclear triad of subs, ICBMs, and strategic bombers has formed a three-part structure of our defense and our readiness. When Trump was asked about the nuclear triad, it was clear he had never heard of it. But he made sure to say that he loves nuclear weapons because, quote, the power, the devastation is very important to me. And for some reason, he thinks we should let more countries obtain nuclear weapons. When Trump was asked about his loose talk about using nuclear weapons, he asked, quote, then why are we making them, close quote. If this were the only blunder he'd made in the campaign, it would be disqualifying on its own. Hillary Clinton doesn't need a crash course in Nukes 101. She not only understands nuclear weapons, she helped cement an agreement with Russia that made the world safer from nuclear weapons. And as president, she has a plan to protect us from nuclear terrorism, to further reduce the chance that these weapons will fall into wrong hands. Second part of the world, let's talk about Russia and Europe. Hillary oversaw hard-nosed negotiations with the Russians for a New START treaty to greatly reduce our country's nuclear stockpiles. The treaty proved that it was still possible for our nations to find common ground on some important points, and there have been others. The destruction of the Syrian chemical weapons stockpile, for example. But that can't blind us to the fact that in so many areas, Russia continues to be a very challenging adversary. Hillary has gone toe-to-toe with Putin. As Secretary of State, she worked to strengthen our military cooperation with NATO and Eastern Europe. Putin even accused Hillary Clinton of helping democratic opposition movements within Russia. And now Hillary has a plan to support our allies, to weaken the Kremlin's hand, and to advance America's long-standing commitment to a Europe that is free, whole, and at peace. Because a strong European partner is always in American interest. We have hundreds of thousands of Americans who live in Europe, hundreds of thousands or millions who visit Europe, and tens of thousands of American troops who are deployed to Europe. A strong Europe is in America's interest. That's not what Donald Trump wants. So maybe it's no surprise why Russia seems to be backing Trump in this election. But the better question is why Trump seems to support Russian interests at the expense of American ones. Here's what we know, just the evidence. One of Donald Trump's sons said, quote, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate part of the Trump organization's assets, and, quote, we see a lot of money pouring in from Russia, close quote. Recent investigations revealed that Trump's been pursuing deals with Russian officials, oligarchs, and developers with deep ties to Russia since the late 1980s. A Putin associate paid him millions to bring the Miss Universe pageant to Moscow. As long as Donald Trump keeps hiding his tax returns, we have no idea how he might stand to profit from these deals with Russian interests or what they might be holding over him. But something strange is clearly going on. Trump's longtime advisor and campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, resigned recently after allegations of corruption, illegal payments, and financial ties to Kremlin-supported officials and organizations in both Russia and the Ukraine. His longtime advisor and campaign chairperson. His go-to defense advisor, General Michael Flynn, appears regularly on Russia's government-funded propaganda channel. Donald Trump has publicly encouraged Russia to hack America and give him information that will help him win the election. No wonder the former acting CIA director, Michael Morell, says he believes that Trump is a, quote, unwitting agent, close quote, of the Russian Federation. Now, this isn't a partisan issue. There's